The cold barrel of a shotgun pressed against Lily Blackburn's spine, and a gruff voice snarled in her ear, "Keep walking, miss. Nice and quiet to the bank." The streets of Willow Creek were quiet in the early morning of 1878, the dusty thoroughfare only beginning to stir with activity as the sun cast long shadows across the rutted dirt road. At 22, Lily had never imagined she'd become the hostage of a bank robber on what should have been a mundane Tuesday morning. Her heart hammered against her ribs as the man pushed her forward. She'd arrived in this frontier town just 3 days ago to take a position as the new schoolteacher, hoping to leave behind the stifling constraints of Boston society. Now she wondered if she'd live to see her first day of classes. "Please," she whispered, "I have nothing of value." "Shut your mouth," the man hissed. "You're my ticket into that bank. Nobody shoots at a man with a pretty lady in front of him." As they approached the bank, a voice called out from across the street, deep and commanding, "I suggest you reconsider what you're doing." The would-be robber spun around, dragging Lily with him. Standing in the middle of the street was a tall man with broad shoulders, dark hair falling just past his collar, and eyes that reminded Lily of thunderclouds. His stance was casual, but there was nothing relaxed about the way his hand hovered near the revolver at his hip. "Stay out of this, York," the robber shouted, pressing the gun harder against Lily's back. "Can't do that, Fletcher," the stranger replied calmly. "Let the lady go." People were beginning to peer from windows and doorways, drawn by the confrontation unfolding in the street. Lily could feel the robber's breath coming faster, his desperation mounting. "I'll kill her," Fletcher threatened, his voice cracking. The man called York shook his head slowly. "We both know you're not a killer." What happened next was so fast Lily could barely process it. York drew his pistol in one fluid motion, and the sound of a gunshot cracked through the morning air. The pressure at her back vanished, and she stumbled forward as her captor crumpled to the ground, clutching his shoulder and howling in pain. Within moments, the town sheriff and his deputy appeared, securing Fletcher while York approached Lily, his expression softening as he holstered his weapon. "Are you hurt, madam?" he asked, keeping a respectful distance. Lily found herself staring at the man who had just saved her life. "No, thank you, Mr. Jack York," he replied with a slight tip of his hat. "And you must be Miss Blackburn, the new schoolteacher. How did you know that?" A small smile touched his lips. Small town, news travels fast. He glanced at the crowd that had gathered. "Welcome to Willow Creek." As Jack York turned to speak with the sheriff, an older woman hurried to Lily's side, wrapping a protective arm around her shoulders. "You poor dear, what a terrible welcome to our town. Come with me, I'll make you some tea to settle your nerves." The woman introduced herself as Martha Wilson, the wife of the town's doctor. As they walked toward the doctor's house, Martha lowered her voice. "Be careful around that man, dear. Jack York may have helped you today, but he's dangerous. Used to ride with one of the worst gangs in the territory before he settled here." Lily glanced back to where Jack stood talking with the sheriff, his tall frame silhouetted against the morning sun. "Dangerous," she echoed. "He's got blood on his hands," Martha continued. "Most folks here are decent, God-fearing people just trying to make a living, but that one." She shook her head. "He's trouble. Stay clear of him if you can." But as Martha led her away, Lily couldn't help looking back one more time. Jack York caught her gaze and nodded once, his expression unreadable. The next morning, Lily was arranging books on the shelves of the small schoolhouse when she heard the creak of the door. She turned to find Jack York standing in the doorway, hat in hand, the sunlight catching in his dark hair. "Mr. York," she said, suddenly conscious of how alone they were. "Miss Blackburn," he nodded politely. "I wanted to check that you're recovering from yesterday's excitement." "I am, thank you." She set down the book she was holding. Your intervention was timely." He smiled slightly. "Fletcher's all bluster, not a real threat, but still, no lady should have to endure such treatment." Lily studied him, Martha Wilson's warning echoing in her mind. "Mrs. Wilson told me you're dangerous." Jack didn't seem surprised or offended by her bluntness. He stepped further into the room, his spurs making a gentle jingling sound on the wooden floor. "Did she now?" She said you used to ride with outlaws. Jack set his hat on one of the children's desks and met her gaze directly. "People in these parts love their stories, Miss Blackburn. Some have more truth than others." "And is that one true?" Lily persisted. He considered her question for a long moment. "I've done things I'm not proud of," he finally admitted. "Had a wild youth, made mistakes. But I've been in Willow Creek for 3 years now, keeping to myself, causing no trouble. Yet they still think you're dangerous." A smile touched his lips, not reaching his eyes. "Only to those who'd harm you, Miss Blackburn." The intensity in his gaze made her breath catch. "I hardly know you, Mr. York." "No, you don't," he agreed. "But I'd like to remedy that if you're willing. Perhaps I could escort you to the town social on Friday evening." Lily hesitated. Everything she'd been taught warned her against men like Jack York, men with mysterious pasts and dangerous reputations. But something in his steady gaze and the way he'd stepped forward without hesitation to save her life made her curious. "I'll consider it," she said finally. Jack nodded, seeming to accept her caution. He retrieved his hat. "That's fair. I'll call on you Friday at 7 and you can give me your answer then." As he turned to leave, Lily called after him, "Mr. York, why did you really come here today?" He paused at the door, looking back at her with those stormy eyes. "Because contrary to what Mrs. Wilson may believe, I think the new schoolteacher might be the most interesting person to arrive in Willow Creek in a very long time." After he left, Lily found herself unable to concentrate on arranging her classroom. Jack York was a puzzle, a man with an outlaw past who now seemed intent on being her protector. Despite Martha's warnings, she couldn't help but feel a flutter of anticipation at the thought of Friday evening. The remainder of the week passed in a flurry of preparation, as Lily readied the schoolhouse for her first students. She met many of the townsfolk, most of whom were welcoming, though she noticed how conversations often changed direction when she mentioned Jack York. On Thursday afternoon, as Lily was leaving the general store with supplies for her classroom, she encountered Sheriff Thomas Hayes, a barrel-chested man with a salt and pepper mustache. "Afternoon, Miss Blackburn," he greeted her. "Settling in all right after Monday's excitement?" "Yes, thank you, Sheriff." Lily hesitated, then asked the question that had been preoccupying her. "Sheriff, may I ask you something about Mr. York?" The sheriff's expression grew cautious. "What would you like to know? Everyone tells me he's dangerous, that he rode with outlaws." "Is that true?" Sheriff Hayes sighed deeply. "Jack York rode with the Carson gang for about 2 years when he was barely more than a boy. Did some things the law doesn't look kindly on. But when he came to Willow Creek, he came straight to my office, told me exactly who he was and what he'd done, and said he was looking for a fresh start." "And you allowed him to stay?" Lily asked, surprised. "I believe a man can change, Miss Blackburn. In the 3 years he's been here, Jack's proven himself a dozen times over. Helps with roundups when the ranchers need extra hands, tracked down the Marshall boy when he got lost in that blizzard 2 winters back." The sheriff adjusted his hat. "Folk have long memories, though, especially for the bad things." "He asked to escort me to the social tomorrow night," Lily confessed. The sheriff smiled. "Did he now? That's the first time I've known Jack to show interest in any of the local ladies. Would you advise against it?" Sheriff Hayes considered her question seriously. I can't tell you what to do, Miss Blackburn, but I will say this. There are men in this town with spotless reputations I wouldn't trust half as much as I trust Jack York. Just because a man's made mistakes doesn't mean he hasn't learned from them. His words stayed with Lily as she returned to her small rented room above the millinery shop. By the time Friday evening arrived, she had made her decision. When Jack knocked on her door precisely at 7, Lily was ready in her best dress, a powder blue gown with delicate lace at the collar. Surprise and pleasure flickered across Jack's face when she opened the door. He had cleaned up impressively, his usually rugged appearance softened by a freshly pressed shirt and his dark hair neatly combed. "You look lovely, Miss Blackburn," he said, his voice low. "Thank you, Mr. York. And thank you for the invitation. I would be pleased to attend the social with you." The town hall had been transformed for the monthly social, with paper lanterns strung across the ceiling and tables laden with food prepared by the women of Willow Creek. As Jack and Lily entered, conversation faltered momentarily, and Lily felt the weight of curious stares. "Perhaps I should have warned you," Jack murmured close to her ear. "That being seen with me might cause a stir." "I'm not concerned with gossip, Mr. York," Lily replied, though she felt a flutter of nervousness at the attention. Jack's expression softened. "Then you're braver than most, Miss Blackburn." The evening progressed more pleasantly than Lily had anticipated. While some of the townsfolk were obviously surprised by her choice of escort, others were welcoming. Jack proved to be an attentive companion, making sure her glass was filled and introducing her to people he thought she should know. When the small band struck up a waltz, Jack turned to her with a question in his eyes. "Would you care to dance, Miss Blackburn?" Lily hesitated only briefly before placing her hand in his. "I would, Mr. York." His hand at her waist was strong and sure as he guided her across the floor. For a man with his reputation, Jack moved with surprising grace. "You dance well for an outlaw," Lily remarked quietly. A smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. "Former outlaw, and you'd be surprised what skills a misspent youth can provide." "Tell me about it," Lily said. "Your youth, I mean." Jack's expression grew more serious. "That's not pleasant conversation for a social. I'd like to know, if we're to be friends." He studied her face for a moment, then nodded slightly. "My father died when I was 14. Mother couldn't keep the farm going. We lost everything. By 16, I was on my own, taking whatever work I could find. When Carson offered me a job as a horse wrangler, I didn't ask too many questions about where the horses came from." "How did you end up riding with them?" Slowly. "First, I was just tending horses. Then I was standing lookout. Before I knew it, I was in the middle of things I couldn't easily walk away from." His grip on her waist tightened slightly. "I never killed anyone, if that's what you're wondering, but I helped men who did, and that's a weight I still carry." "What changed?" Jack's eyes darkened with memory. "Carson decided to rob a stagecoach. There was a family aboard, mother, father, 2 little girls. Things went bad. Carson wanted no witnesses." He paused. "I couldn't be part of that. I drew on him, got the family out. Nearly didn't make it out myself." Lily found herself holding her breath. "What happened to Carson? Last I heard, he was still running his gang up north. He's not a man who forgives being crossed." The music ended and they stopped dancing, though neither moved to break apart immediately. "That's why you're really here in Willow Creek, isn't it?" Lily asked. "Hiding." Jack's smile was grim. "Not hiding, waiting. Carson's not the type to forget. Sooner or later he'll find me. I've made my peace with that." "That's a terrible way to live," Lily said softly. "It's better than the way I was living before." He offered her his arm. "Would you like some punch?" As they walked toward the refreshment table, Martha Wilson intercepted them, her expression pinched with disapproval. "Lily, dear, could I speak with you a moment?" she asked, pointedly ignoring Jack, Before Lily could respond, Jack spoke. "I'll get you that punch, Miss Blackburn." He nodded politely to Martha. "Mrs. Wilson." When he was out of earshot, Martha seized Lily's arm. "What are you thinking, arriving with that man? The entire town is talking. Mr. York has been nothing but a gentleman," Lily defended. "You don't know what he is," Martha hissed. "My husband treated men who'd crossed paths with the Carson gang. The stories he heard." She shuddered dramatically. "That man has blood on his hands, no matter how charming he seems now." Lily withdrew her arm from Martha's grasp. "Sheriff Hayes seems to trust him." "Thomas Hayes is too soft-hearted for his own good. York may have fooled him, but he hasn't fooled everyone. Promise me you'll be careful, Lily." "I appreciate your concern, Mrs. Wilson, but I'm quite capable of making my own judgments about character." Martha's expression hardened. "Your position as schoolteacher requires exemplary moral character. The school board might reconsider their decision if they feel you're setting a poor example." The veiled threat stung Lily. "Are you suggesting that my choice of escort to a town social could cost me my position?" "I'm merely advising caution, dear, for your own good." Jack returned with 2 cups of punch, his eyes quickly assessing the tension between the women. "Everything all right?" "Perfectly fine," Lily said, taking her punch with a smile that felt strained. "Mrs. Wilson was just sharing some town gossip." Martha pressed her lips together disapprovingly. "Good evening, Mr. York," she said stiffly, before turning and walking away. Jack watched her go with a wry expression. "I seem to have that effect on certain ladies of the town." "She threatened my position at the school," Lily said quietly. Jack's expression darkened. "Because of me. She implied that my association with you reflects poorly on my character." "Perhaps she's right," Jack said after a moment. "I didn't think. I should take you home. This was a mistake." "No," Lily said firmly. "I won't let narrow-minded gossip dictate my actions." Jack studied her face. "You're stubborn, Miss Blackburn. I prefer principled Mr. York." She set down her untouched punch. "Now I believe they're starting another dance." By the end of the evening, Lily's defiant stand had softened the attitudes of at least some of the townsfolk. Jack's quiet courtesy and obvious respect toward her had not gone unnoticed, and several people had made a point of speaking to them both. As they walked back to Lily's lodgings under a canopy of stars, Jack seemed troubled. "I shouldn't have asked you to the social," he said finally. "I didn't consider how it might complicate things for you." "I'm glad you did," Lily replied, "and I'm glad I accepted." They stopped outside her door and Jack hesitated. "Miss Blackburn, Lily, I enjoy your company more than I've enjoyed anything in a long time, but my past is complicated and potentially dangerous." "Because of Carson," Jack nodded. "If he ever tracks me down, anyone associated with me could be at risk." "Is that why you've kept to yourself these past 3 years?" "Partly." He looked away. "And partly because most folks around here made it clear they preferred I keep my distance." Lily reached out impulsively and took his hand. "I don't share that preference, Mr. York." The surprise in his eyes was quickly followed by something warmer. "Jack," he said softly, "if we're to be friends, you should call me Jack." "Jack," she repeated, liking the way his name felt on her lips. "And I'm Lily." He raised her hand to his lips in a gesture that belonged to another century, another world. "Good night, Lily. Thank you for a memorable evening." As Lily watched him walk away, she knew that despite the warnings and whispers, she was already falling for the dangerous cowboy with the troubled past. The following Monday marked Lily's first day teaching at Willow Creek's small schoolhouse. Her 12 students ranged in age from 6 to 15, a mix of children from the town and surrounding farms. Despite her nerves, the day went well, the children responding to her enthusiasm and gentle discipline. When school let out for the day, she was surprised to find Jack waiting at the edge of the schoolyard, leaning against a sturdy oak tree. "Mr. York," she greeted him, aware of the curious eyes of her departing students. "Miss Blackburn," he replied formally, tipping his hat. When the last child was out of earshot, his expression relaxed. "How was your first day?" "Exhausting but wonderful," Lily admitted with a smile. "What brings you here? I thought you might like to see something." He gestured to two horses tied nearby, one his own bay gelding and the other a gentle-looking chestnut mare. "If you're not too tired, that is." Lily glanced down at her practical teaching dress. "I'm not dressed for riding." "It's not far, and Marigold there is the most ladylike horse in the county. She'd never unseat a rider or sully a dress." Curiosity won out over propriety. "Let me lock up the schoolhouse." 20 minutes later, they were riding side by side along a narrow trail that wound into the hills east of town. The late afternoon sun bathed everything in golden light, and the air was sweet with the scent of wildflowers. "Where are we going?" Lily asked, relaxing into the rhythm of the horse beneath her. "Patience, schoolteacher," Jack replied with a smile. "It's just around this bend." The trail curved around a large outcropping of rock, and suddenly the view opened up before them. A small, crystal-clear lake nestled in a natural bowl formed by surrounding hills, its surface reflecting the azure sky like a perfect mirror. Wildflowers carpeted the shoreline in swaths of yellow, purple, and white. "Oh," Lily breathed, drawing her horse to a stop. "It's beautiful." Jack dismounted and came around to help her down. His hands at her waist were strong and sure, and for a brief moment when her feet touched the ground, they stood very close, his eyes searching hers. "I found this place my first week in Willow Creek," he said, stepping back. "Never brought anyone here before." "Thank you for sharing it with me," Lily said softly. They walked to the edge of the lake, where Jack spread a blanket he'd brought in his saddlebag. From the same bag, he produced a small bundle of food, bread, cheese, and apples. "I thought you might be hungry after corralling all those children all day," he explained, suddenly looking uncertain. Lily sat on the blanket, tucking her skirts around her legs. "This is lovely, Jack, truly." They ate in companionable silence for a while, watching the occasional fish jump in the lake and listening to birdsong from the surrounding trees. "Tell me about Boston," Jack said eventually. "What made you leave it for a dusty little town like Willow Creek?" Lily considered his question. "I wanted a place where I could be myself, not just someone's daughter or potential wife. In Boston there were expectations, a path I was supposed to follow. And that path didn't include teaching in a one-room schoolhouse in the middle of nowhere," she laughed. "No, it involved marrying well and hosting dinner parties for my husband's business associates. My father had it all planned out. You must have disappointed him greatly. He'll recover. My younger sister is far more amenable to his plans." Lily plucked a blade of grass, twirling it between her fingers. "What about your family? Do you have siblings?" Jack's expression softened. "A sister, Eleanor. She's in St. Louis now, married to a shopkeeper. We write occasionally." "Does she know where you are?" "Yes, she's the only one who does." He tossed a pebble into the lake, watching the ripples spread. "I visit when I can, though not as often as I'd like. It's safer for her if Carson can't track me through her." Lily studied his profile, strong and somehow sad in the golden light. "Do you ever think of leaving?" "Going somewhere Carson wouldn't find you." "Like where?" "I don't know, California, Oregon. The world is vast, Jack," he smiled slightly. "I've thought about it, but running forever isn't much of a life either." He looked at her directly. "And lately I've found reasons to stay right here in Willow Creek." The way he said it, his eyes holding hers, made Lily's heart quicken. She looked away, suddenly flustered. "It's getting late. We should head back before dark. Jack didn't press the moment. He simply nodded and began packing up their small picnic. The ride back to town was quiet, both of them lost in their thoughts as the sun began to set behind the mountains. When they reached the edge of town, Jack pulled his horse to a stop. "I'll leave you here," he said. Less fodder for the gossips. Lily wanted to protest but knew he was being sensible. "Thank you for today, Jack, for showing me your secret lake." "Not a secret anymore," he said with a small smile. "Now it's our place." The simple phrase "our place" warmed her more than it should have. With a final nod, Jack turned his horse and rode toward his small cabin on the outskirts of town, while Lily continued into Willow Creek, already looking forward to when she would see him again. Over the next few weeks, a routine developed. Jack would appear at the schoolhouse after the children had gone home, sometimes with horses ready for a ride, other times simply to walk her home. On Saturdays, they often spent hours at their lake, talking about everything and nothing. He told her stories of his travels, and she shared her dreams of building a real school in Willow Creek someday, with multiple classrooms and a proper library. The townsfolk's attitudes were slowly shifting. While some, like Martha Wilson, maintained their disapproval, others had begun to accept the friendship between the new schoolteacher and the reformed outlaw. Sheriff Hayes made a point of stopping to chat whenever he saw them together, his approval obvious. One Saturday in late October, with the aspen trees turning brilliant gold against the blue sky, Jack and Lily rode to the lake for what might be their last picnic before winter set in. The air held a crisp chill, and Jack had brought an extra blanket to wrap around Lily's shoulders. As they sat by the water's edge, Jack seemed unusually quiet, his gaze distant. "What are you thinking about?" Lily asked, nudging his shoulder gently with her own. He turned to look at her, his expression serious. "I've been offered a job, driving a herd up to Wyoming for the Breckenridge Ranch." Lily felt a cold that had nothing to do with the autumn air. For how long? 3 weeks, maybe a month. Jack picked up a small stone and skipped it across the lake's surface. "Good money. The kind that could help a man make plans." "What kind of plans?" He looked at her directly, his gaze intense. "The kind that might include a future, with someone special." Lily's heart skipped a beat. Over the weeks they had grown close, but neither had spoken of feelings beyond friendship, though the tension between them had been building with each meeting, each conversation, each brief touch. "When would you leave?" she asked. "Tomorrow morning." "Early." "So soon?" Jack nodded. "Breckenridge needs the cattle delivered before the mountain passes get too dangerous. Winter comes early up north." Lily pulled the blanket tighter around her shoulders. "It sounds dangerous. It's just cattle driving. I've done it a dozen times. But you'll be exposed." "What if Carson?" Jack reached out and took her hand, his touch quieting her fears. "Carson operates further east. This route is well away from his territory. I'll be fine, Lily." She intertwined her fingers with his. "Promise me you'll be careful." "I promise." He hesitated, then continued, "And when I come back, I'd like us to talk about what this is between us." Lily's breath caught. "What do you think it is?" Jack's free hand came up to touch her cheek gently. "I think it's something I never expected to find. Especially not with a Boston schoolteacher who's too stubborn to heed warnings about dangerous men." "Perhaps I don't find you as dangerous as advertised," Lily whispered. The corner of Jack's mouth lifted in a smile. "Then perhaps you haven't been paying attention." The moment hung between them, charged with possibility. Lily found herself leaning toward him, drawn by something stronger than caution or propriety. Jack closed the distance, his lips meeting hers in a kiss that was gentle at first, then deepening as Lily responded. His hand slid from her cheek to the back of her neck, cradling her head as the blanket slipped forgotten from her shoulders. When they finally broke apart, both were breathing unevenly. Jack rested his forehead against hers, his eyes closed. "I've wanted to do that since the night of the social," he admitted. Lily smiled, her heart racing. "Why did you wait so long?" "Because once I started, I wasn't sure I could stop." He pulled back slightly to look into her eyes. "Lily, she pressed her fingers against his lips. "Tell me when you come back. I'll be waiting." The ride back to town was filled with a new awareness, a current running between them that made even their silence meaningful. At her door, Jack kissed her once more, a promise in the gentle pressure of his lips. "1 month," he said. "No longer." "I'll count the days," Lily replied, only half joking. After he left, Lily found herself touching her lips, still feeling the imprint of his kiss. Despite the warnings, despite his past, she had fallen in love with Jack York. And when he returned, she would tell him so. The first 3 weeks of Jack's absence crawled by. Lily threw herself into her teaching, starting an evening reading class for adults in the town and organizing preparations for a Thanksgiving celebration at the school. Every night, she marked another day off her calendar, counting down to Jack's expected return. As the 4th week began with no word from Jack, Lily tried to quell her growing anxiety. Cattle drives were unpredictable, she told herself. Delays happened. But when Sheriff Hayes stopped by the schoolhouse after hours with a concerned expression, her worry solidified into fear. "Any word from Jack?" the sheriff asked without preamble. Lily shook her head. "Nothing. Should there be?" Sheriff Hayes rubbed his mustache thoughtfully. "The Breckenridge hands returned yesterday. Said Jack parted ways with them in Laramie after the delivery, mentioned heading to Cheyenne for supplies before returning here." "That sounds normal enough," Lily said, though her heart had begun to race. "It does," the sheriff agreed. "Except I got a wire today from the sheriff in Cheyenne. Jack never arrived there, and there's word that Lyle Carson was seen in Laramie around the same time." The room seemed to tilt around Lily. "You think Carson found him?" "I don't know," Sheriff Hayes admitted. "But I've sent wires to every law enforcement office between here and Laramie. If Jack's out there, we'll find him." But as days stretched into a second week with no news, Lily's hope began to fade. She found herself walking to the edge of town each evening, staring down the road as if she could will Jack to appear, on a cold November morning. As Lily was preparing the schoolhouse for the day, the door opened to admit Sheriff Hayes. One look at his grim expression told her the news wasn't good. "They found his horse," the sheriff said quietly, "wandering outside of a small settlement called Bitter Creek. No sign of Jack, but—" He hesitated. "Tell me," Lily demanded, her voice barely steady. "There was blood on the saddle, quite a bit of it." Lily gripped the edge of her desk to keep from swaying. "Is he dead?" "I don't know, Lily. The local law is searching, but it's rough country and winter's setting in. If Carson took him—" He didn't need to finish the thought. They both knew what it meant. Lily straightened her shoulders, refusing to break down in front of the sheriff. "What can I do?" Sheriff Hayes looked surprised by her question. "Do nothing, Lily. This isn't a matter for a schoolteacher. I just thought you should know, given your friendship with Jack." "It was more than friendship," Lily said quietly. The sheriff's expression softened with understanding. "I figured as much. I'm sorry, Lily, truly. But the best thing you can do is continue your work here and let me handle the search." After he left, Lily sat at her desk for a long time, staring at nothing. The children would arrive soon, expecting their teacher to be composed and ready for the day's lessons. Somehow, she would have to find the strength to put aside her fear and grief until the school day ended. But as she opened her lesson planner, a folded piece of paper fell out, a rough map Jack had drawn showing the route to their lake. Staring at his strong, angular handwriting, Lily made a decision. She wasn't going to sit in Willow Creek and wait for news. If Jack was alive, he needed help. And if he wasn't, she needed to know. That evening, Lily paid a visit to Samuel Johnson, the livery stable owner. Despite his surprise at her request to purchase a horse and supplies for a journey, he asked no questions when she explained she needed to visit a sick relative in Laramie. By dawn the next morning, she was riding east, a borrowed revolver in her saddlebag and Jack's map tucked safely in her pocket. The journey to Laramie took 5 days of hard riding. Lily's Boston upbringing had included riding lessons, but nothing had prepared her for the grueling pace she set herself, stopping only when necessary at small settlements along the way. At each stop, she showed a sketch of Jack she had carefully drawn from memory, asking if anyone had seen him. The answers were uniformly negative until she reached a small trading post 2 days' ride from Laramie. The weathered old man who ran the post studied her drawing with narrowed eyes. Might have seen him, 'bout 3 weeks back. Was with some rough-looking fellas, though didn't seem too friendly with them if you take my meaning. Lily's heart raced. Was he injured? Can't say for certain. Had his hat pulled low, but there was blood on his shirt. One of the men with him did all the talking, bought supplies for a long trip. Headed north from here. North, Lily repeated. Are you sure? Yep, got a cabin up that way myself for hunting season. Noticed 'cause they were heading into mighty inhospitable country this time of year. Lily pulled out a map she had purchased in the last town. Could you show me where? The old man pointed to a remote area in the foothills of the Medicine Bow Mountains. Up there somewhere. Old mining country. Lots of abandoned claims, cabins no one uses anymore. Good place to disappear if a man wanted to. Or a good place to take someone you didn't want found, Lily thought grimly. Is there a settlement up there? Any law? The man shook his head. Nearest law's in Medicine Bow, and that's a good 3 days' ride in good weather. With the snow already starting, could be longer. Lily made her decision. I'll need more supplies and directions. The old man eyed her skeptically. Miss, that's no country for a lady to be traveling alone, especially with winter coming on. I'm not alone, Lily said firmly. The man in that drawing is waiting for me. Whether it was her determination or the desperation in her eyes, the old trader stopped arguing. He helped her purchase appropriate supplies and drew a rough map of the area, marking possible routes and shelters. If you're determined to go, best wait till morning, he advised, and take this. He handed her a heavy wool coat, much too large for her frame. Belonged to my wife, God rest her. It's warm and you'll need it up there. Lily thanked him, touched by his kindness. That night, as she lay in a small room behind the trading post, she tried not to think about what she might find at the end of her journey or whether she would find Jack at all. The next morning dawned clear and cold, with a hint of snow in the air. Lily set out at first light, following the crude map northward into increasingly rugged terrain. By midday, light flurries were falling, and by evening she was riding through several inches of snow, the landscape transformed into a white wilderness. She spent that night huddled in the shelter of a rock overhang, keeping a small fire burning to ward off the bitter cold. As she stared into the flames, doubt crept in. What was she doing out here, a schoolteacher with minimal survival skills, searching for a man who might already be dead? But every time she considered turning back, she remembered Jack's promise. 1 month, no longer. He had meant to return to her. Only something terrible could have kept him from it. On the 3rd day of her journey north, as Lily picked her way through a narrow pass, her horse suddenly tensed, ears pricked forward. She reined in, listening. At first she heard nothing over the soft hiss of falling snow. Then a distant crack like a branch breaking or a gunshot. Lily urged her horse forward more quickly, following the sound. The terrain sloped downward into a small valley, where a thin column of smoke rose from what appeared to be a cabin nestled against the hillside. As she drew closer, staying within the tree line for cover, she could make out a small barn and corral beside the cabin, and several horses stamping in the snow. She dismounted and tied her horse securely, then crept forward on foot until she had a clear view of the cabin. Two men stood on the porch, rifles in hand, apparently arguing. Even from a distance, she could tell they were rough-looking characters. One gestured angrily toward the barn while the other shook his head emphatically. Lily's attention was drawn to movement near the barn, a third man emerging with a bucket of water. Something about his posture, the set of his shoulders, made her heart leap. Even with his face turned away, she knew it was Jack. He was alive. Moving slowly, favoring his left side, but alive. Relief washed through her, followed quickly by the sobering reality of the situation. Jack was clearly a prisoner, and judging by the armed men watching him, Carson's men. She needed a plan, and quickly. As she watched, Jack carried the water into the cabin, the two guards following him inside. The door closed, and Lily was left staring at the silent building, trying to formulate a strategy. The most sensible course would be to ride to Medicine Bow for help. But that would mean leaving Jack here for days, perhaps a week given the weather. Anything could happen in that time. No, she needed to act now. But how? She was one woman with limited experience, facing at least 3 armed men. The answer came to her as the snow began to fall more heavily. They wouldn't be expecting anyone to approach in this weather, and they certainly wouldn't be expecting a woman. Surprise might be her only advantage. Lily waited until dusk, when the falling snow and gathering darkness would provide additional cover. She approached the cabin from behind, moving as quietly as she could through the drifts. A single window on the back wall glowed with lamplight, and she carefully peered inside. What she saw made her blood run cold. Jack was tied to a chair in the center of the room, his face bruised, a blood-stained bandage visible beneath his torn shirt. 3 men lounged around the cabin, the 2 she had seen earlier, plus a third, older man with a shock of white hair and cold eyes that could only belong to Lyle Carson himself. Carson was speaking, gesturing with a revolver as he paced in front of Jack. Though Lily couldn't hear the words, the menace in his posture was clear. Jack's response, whatever it was, earned him a backhanded blow that snapped his head to the side. Lily ducked away from the window, her mind racing. She needed a diversion, something to separate the men, to give her a chance to help Jack. The answer came to her as she glanced toward the small barn. Fire. Not to harm the horses, but if she could set the hay storage alight, the commotion might draw out Carson and his men, giving her an opportunity to reach Jack. Moving quickly but carefully, Lily made her way to the barn. Inside, she found what she needed: a lantern hanging from a hook, and a large stack of hay bales against the far wall, away from where the horses were stabled. Using the matches from her supplies, she lit the lantern and positioned it at the edge of the hay, adjusting it so the flame would eventually catch, but not immediately. Then she retreated to a position behind a large woodpile near the cabin's back door, the borrowed revolver clutched in her shaking hands. Now she had only to wait. It took longer than she expected, nearly 20 minutes by her estimation, before the fire caught properly. When it did, the dry hay went up quickly, sending smoke billowing into the night sky. The horses in the corral began to whinny in alarm. The cabin door burst open, and voices called out in confusion. 2 men, Carson's guards, raced toward the barn, shouting about the horses. Carson himself appeared in the doorway, his expression furious as he surveyed the scene. This was her chance. Lily crept from her hiding place and slipped through the still open door into the cabin. Jack was still tied to the chair, his head hanging forward as if exhausted or unconscious. At the sound of the door closing, he looked up, his eyes widening in shock. "Lily," he whispered, disbelief etched on his battered face. "How shh," she cautioned, hurrying to him and fumbling with the ropes that bound his wrists. "We don't have much time." "You can't be here," Jack said urgently. "Carson will kill you. He'll have to catch me first," Lily replied, trying to sound braver than she felt as she worked on the knots. "Can you walk?" "I think so." "Lily, listen to me. You need to go now. Leave me and save yourself." She met his gaze steadily. "I didn't ride for days through snow and mountains to leave without you, Jack York. So stop arguing and help me figure out how to get these ropes undone." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "Stubborn school teacher." "Difficult patient," she countered, finally loosening one of the knots. Just as Jack's right hand came free, the cabin door flew open. Carson stood framed in the doorway, his face contorted with rage as he took in the scene before him. "Well, well," he drawled, raising his revolver. "What have we here? York, you've been holding out on me. Never mentioned you had such a pretty little friend." Jack's body tensed. "She's nothing to do with this, Carson. Let her go." "I don't think so." Carson stepped further into the cabin, closing the door behind him. "See, I was just about ready to end our little reunion, York, but now I'm thinking maybe we extend the festivities." His cold eyes fixed on Lily. "What's your name, girl?" Lily straightened, still standing behind Jack's chair, her hands working frantically at the ropes binding his left wrist while she kept Carson's attention on her face. "Lily Blackburn. I'm the school teacher in Willow Creek," Carson laughed. "A school teacher? You've gone soft, York. Time was you wouldn't have looked twice at a proper lady." "People change," Jack said, his voice tight with pain or anger or both. "Not me," Carson replied, his smile vanishing. "I still settle my debts, and you owe me, York, for the money I lost when you turned on me. For the men who were hung because of your testimony." As he spoke, Carson raised his gun, aiming it directly at Jack's heart. "I was going to make it quick, for old time's sake, but now I think I'll let you watch while I show your school teacher what happens to people who cross Lyle Carson." Time seemed to slow for Lily. She saw Carson's finger tighten on the trigger, saw Jack tensing, preparing to lunge despite still being partially bound. Without conscious thought, she reached for the revolver tucked in her belt, brought it up and fired. The report was deafening in the small cabin. Carson staggered, a look of utter surprise crossing his face as he looked down at the spreading red stain on his chest. His gun discharged harmlessly into the floor as he collapsed. In the ringing silence that followed, Lily stood frozen, the smoking gun still extended. She had never fired a weapon at anything but targets before today, had never imagined she could take a human life. "Lily." Jack's voice broke through her shock. "Lily, look at me." She tore her gaze from Carson's still form to meet Jack's concerned eyes. "We need to go," he said urgently. "His men will have heard the shot." His words galvanized her into action. She quickly freed his remaining wrist, then helped him to his feet. Jack swayed slightly but remained standing, grimacing with pain. "Can you ride?" she asked. "I'll have to," he replied grimly. "The horses are in the corral. We need to move fast." They made it outside just as the two guards came running from the burning barn. Seeing Jack and Lily, they shouted and reached for their weapons. Jack pushed Lily behind him, raising Carson's revolver, which he had retrieved from the floor. "Don't," he called out. "Carson's dead. There's been enough killing." The men hesitated, exchanging glances. "You're lying," one of them challenged. "See for yourself," Jack replied. "But we're leaving, now." Whether it was the authority in his voice or the clear threat of the gun in his hand, The men stood down, allowing Jack and Lily to back slowly toward the corral. They quickly saddled 2 horses, Lily working faster than Jack with his injured side. Within minutes, they were riding away from the cabin, pushing through the falling snow as quickly as they dared. Jack led them on a different route than the one Lily had taken, heading west rather than south. "Where are we going?" Lily asked when they finally slowed their pace, the cabin long out of sight behind them. "There's a line shack about 10 miles from here," Jack explained, his voice tight with pain. "Used by cattle outfits in the summer, should be empty now but stocked with basics. We can shelter there tonight, then head for Medicine Bow tomorrow." Lily studied his face in the dim light. Despite his stoic expression, she could see the pallor beneath his tan, the tightness around his eyes that spoke of serious pain. "How badly are you hurt?" she asked directly. Jack's attempt at her reassuring smile failed. "I've had worse." "That's not an answer, Jack," he sighed. "Couple of broken ribs, knife wound in my side that's probably infected, nothing that won't heal with time, which we don't have if Carson's men decide to follow us." "They won't," Jack said with certainty. "Not tonight in this weather, and tomorrow. Well, Carson was the one with the grudge. Without him, they'll likely take what they can from the cabin and scatter." They rode in silence for a time, the only sounds the creak of leather and the soft huffing of their horses' breath in the cold air. "How did you find me?" Jack finally asked, glancing over at her with wonderment in his eyes. Lily explained about her journey, the trading post owner, the clues she had followed. Jack shook his head in disbelief. "You risked your life. You could have been killed." "So could you," Lily pointed out. "Would you have done any less for me? That's different." "Why?" "Because you're a man and I'm a woman. Despite everything," Jack chuckled. "Because I'm used to this kind of trouble. You're a schoolteacher from Boston." "A schoolteacher who just saved your life," Lily reminded him, Jack's expression sobered. "Yes, you did." He looked away into the swirling snow. "I never wanted you to have to do something like that, to have that on your conscience." Lily considered her feelings about shooting Carson. There was shock, yes, and a certain numbness, but not regret. He was going to kill you and then me. I made a choice. "It changes you," Jack warned softly. "Taking a life, even one that deserves taking." "I know," Lily acknowledged. "But some changes we don't get to choose, they choose us." Jack studied her face for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "You're an extraordinary woman, Lily Blackburn." The line shack, when they reached it, was little more than a crude one-room cabin with a stone fireplace and rough-hewn furniture. But it was shelter from the snow, which had begun to fall more heavily, and there was a stack of firewood beside the hearth. Lily set about building a fire while Jack tended to the horses in the small lean-to attached to the cabin. By the time he came inside, stamping snow from his boots, she had a cheerful blaze going and had found basic provisions: coffee, beans, salt pork in a small cupboard. "Sit," she ordered, gesturing to a chair near the fire. "I need to look at your wounds." Too exhausted to argue, Jack sank into the chair and allowed her to help him remove his coat and shirt. The sight of his injuries made Lily catch her breath. His torso was a map of bruises, and the bandage on his left side was soaked through with blood and yellowish discharge that spoke of infection. "This needs cleaning," she said, keeping her voice steady. "And fresh bandages." "There should be a medical kit somewhere," Jack said, his eyes half closed with fatigue. "These places usually have basic supplies." Lily found the kit in a trunk at the foot of the narrow bed. It contained the essentials: bandages, a bottle of whiskey for disinfection, even a needle and thread for stitching if necessary. Cleaning the wound was a painful process for both of them, Jack because of the physical pain, and Lily because she hated causing him further suffering. But the wound needed attention. the previous stitches having torn in several places. "This is going to need restitching," she said after examining the damage carefully. Jack eyed her dubiously. "Have you ever done that before?" "No, but I've done plenty of needlework." "The principle can't be that different." She tried to sound more confident than she felt. "That's reassuring," Jack muttered, but he reached for the whiskey bottle and took a long swallow. "Go ahead. Just try not to enjoy it too much." Despite her nervousness, Lily's hands remained steady as she stitched the wound closed. Jack remained silent throughout the ordeal, his jaw clenched, his only reaction an occasional sharp intake of breath. When she had finished and bandaged the wound with clean strips of cloth, he caught her hand. "Thank you," Lily smiled tiredly. "I think that makes us even." "Not even close," Jack said, his eyes serious. "Lily, what you did, coming after me like that, no one has ever—" He trailed off, seemingly unable to find the words cared enough, she supplied softly. "Believed in me enough," he corrected. "Everyone else would have accepted that I was gone, probably assumed I'd gone back to my old ways or that my past had finally caught up with me." "Sheriff Hayes didn't believe that," Lily said. "He was looking for you too, but you found me." Their eyes met, and in that moment, everything that had been left unsaid between them seemed to flow across the small space separating them. Jack tugged gently on her hand, drawing her closer until she was kneeling beside his chair. "I love you," he said simply. "I think I have since that first day when you didn't flinch away from my reputation. I should have told you before I left." Lily's heart soared at his words. "I love you too, Jack. Enough to cross mountains and face down outlaws, apparently." His laugh turned into a wince as it pulled at his ribs. "Remind me never to make you angry." Lily rose and pressed a gentle kiss to his forehead. "You need to rest. We can talk more in the morning." Despite Jack's protests that she should take the bed, Lily insisted he needed it more with his injuries. She made herself as comfortable as possible near the fire, wrapped in her coat and a blanket she found in the trunk. Just before she drifted off to sleep, she heard Jack's voice from the darkness. "When we get back to Willow Creek, marry me." Lily smiled into the firelight. "Is that a question or a command, Mr. York?" "A hope," he replied softly. "The greatest hope of my life." "Then yes," Lily whispered. "I'll marry you." They returned to Willow Creek 2 weeks later, having traveled slowly due to Jack's injuries and the winter weather. Sheriff Hayes met them at the edge of town, his weathered face breaking into a wide smile of relief. "Thought I'd seen the last of you too," he said, shaking Jack's hand and tipping his hat to Lily. "Got a wire from the sheriff in Medicine Bow about what happened with Carson. Said Miss Blackburn here is quite the marksman." Jack's arm tightened around Lily's waist. "She saved my life in more ways than one." Word of their return and the circumstances of Jack's captivity and rescue spread quickly through the small town. To Lily's surprise, the reaction was largely positive. It seemed that facing down a notorious outlaw gang to save the man she loved had earned her a certain respect, even from previous critics like Martha Wilson. When they announced their intention to marry, there were still a few raised eyebrows, but the majority of the townsfolk offered their congratulations. Sheriff Hayes agreed to stand as Jack's best man, and even the school board, after an initial period of concern about the propriety of a married woman teaching, agreed that Lily could continue in her position. They were married on Christmas Day in the town's small church, with most of Willow Creek in attendance. Lily wore a simple white dress that Martha Wilson had helped her make, and Jack looked handsome and only slightly uncomfortable in a new suit. After the ceremony, as they greeted well-wishers outside the church, Martha approached them with a somewhat sheepish expression. "I owe you an apology, Mr. York," she said stiffly. "It seems I may have misjudged you." Jack smiled and shook her hand. No need for apologies, Mrs. Wilson. Your concern for Lily was well-intentioned. Martha turned to Lily. And you, my dear, I told you he was dangerous. You did, Lily agreed, slipping her arm through her new husband's. It seems I was wrong about that as well. Jack's eyes met Lily's, a private smile passing between them as he repeated the words he had spoken to her all those months ago. Only to those who'd harm you. 5 years later, Lily stood in the doorway of their ranch house, watching as Jack taught their 3-year-old son, Thomas, to sit on a gentle pony. Their 1-year-old daughter, Elena, named for Jack's sister, babbled happily in Lily's arms. The ranch was small but prosperous, the result of hard work and the money Jack had saved from his cattle drives. They still maintained close ties with the town. Lily continued to teach, though now only 3 days a week, and Jack had recently been persuaded to join the town council. Carson's death had ended the threat that had hung over Jack for so long. With that shadow lifted, he had blossomed into a respected member of the community, his past largely forgotten or forgiven by those who mattered. As Lily watched her husband lift their laughing son from the pony's back and swing him high in the air, she remembered the warning she had received when she first arrived in Willow Creek. They had told her he was dangerous, a man with blood on his hands and darkness in his past. They hadn't been entirely wrong. Jack York was dangerous to those who threatened what he loved, but to Lily and their children, he was nothing but gentle strength and unwavering devotion. "What are you thinking about?" Jack asked, approaching with Thomas perched on his shoulders. "About how right I was to ignore everyone's warnings about you," Lily replied with a smile. Jack grinned and leaned in to kiss her, their son giggling above them. "Stubborn schoolteacher. Dangerous cowboy," she countered, her eyes full of love. And in that moment, with her family around her and the life they had built together stretching before them, Lily knew she had made the right choice on that long-ago day when she decided to trust the man everyone else feared, the man who had promised to be dangerous only to those who would harm her, and who had kept that promise through all the years since.